Good evening. I'm Brian Edwards, Dean of the School of Liberal Arts here at Tulane University in New Orleans. We're in New Orleans, but we're of course on Zoom, so we are pleased to welcome you to tonight's event. And I see people joining in to this webinar format. Let me, before I introduce the series and the format, I will tell you that we will be able to, myself and the speaker, Dr. Hoover, will be able to see the questions through a chat box. And so when we get to the question and answer period, which we will look forward to, I'll be moderating that and we'll both see those. So please do join in and ask questions in that format. And we really look forward to a wonderful discussion and conversation. This is the first event in a new series that is starting this semester. It has 4 scheduled events already this semester. And it's in itself in a new lecture series that we started in 2020 before COVID shut down some of our plans for last spring. And we'd had a spring schedule planned that was, of course, postponed. And that lecture series, the Dean's Speaker Series, sorry, is a series in itself that brings prominent scholars, writers, and practitioners in the humanities, arts, and social sciences to Tulane and allows us to have a conversation with them and about the variety and vitality of the liberal arts in a range of areas. And we had one event before we got our spring shutdown, and we'll be rescheduling some of those events that were planned for last spring. But in the meantime, we decided to dedicate an entire year of series of events in this series to a new topic and theme, and that is anti-racism and the disciplines. And the overarching idea of the series as a whole is, of course, that many of the liberal arts disciplines themselves as disciplines have complicated relationships to structural racism, to colonialism in some cases, and or imperialism. And it's very interesting to see and think about and deconstruct, so to speak, how those histories are structured into the rules, let's say, of the disciplines themselves. Scholars, including our speaker this evening, working in those disciplines, have been working to uncover those histories, and not only to explain the histories of those disciplines, but really in the effort of thinking about and staging work for the next generation of scholars. And that's something that we're exceptionally interested in here, and why, in a sense, we put together this year-long series. So each speaker will give a talk, and you're here for this, and those will all be open to the public. And then we'll meet, as part of the idea, we'll meet with a smaller group, usually the next day, with faculty and graduate students in particular, for a workshop on what anti-racist research and scholarship looks like, and in a sense, thinking about that as a number of scholars are working and thinking about their own careers. I am exceptionally proud to begin this series and to have the opportunity to work with, as my newest colleague, Gary Hoover, who we were in conversation with before the announcement of his own joining Tulane University as the director of the Murphy Institute for Political Economy. His name had come up all over the place as the ideal speaker for the series to take on the discipline of economics. And in the meantime, we couldn't be more thrilled that he's now a member of the leadership of the Murphy Institute and of Tulane, as well as a professor of economics in the School of Liberal Arts. Gary Hoover comes to Tulane from the University of Oklahoma, where he is physically right now, although virtually he's right here with us at School of Liberal Arts. And from 1998 to 2014, he was the William White, before, I just read it from my notes wrong. He has served as the department chair of economics at the University of Oklahoma since 2015. In 2017, he was appointed a President's Associate Presidential Professorship there, and a prestigious group that was established to recognize those faculty members at Oklahoma who excelled in all of their professional activities and relate to students they teach and mentor, which is one of the many reasons that we're so excited that he's joining us here. Before Oklahoma, he spent 16 years teaching at the University of Alabama, where he was the William White McDonald Family Distinguished Faculty Fellow and the James Harrison Family Endowed Teaching Excellence Faculty Fellow for years before that. He had been an assistant dean for faculty and graduate development at the Culver House College of Business Administration for 9 years during that time. But Hoover, as Gary Hoover is known to his friends and colleagues, is a member and co-chair of the American Economics Association's Committee on the Status of Minority Groups in the Economics Profession, which was established in 1968 to increase the representation of minorities in economics, primarily by broadening opportunities for the training of underrepresented minorities. He is the current and founding editor of the Journal of Economics, Race, and Policy, which examines the intersection of local and global issues concerning economic conditions, race, ethnicity, and gender, and policy prescriptions that address economic disparities. His list, as you can imagine, of roles and achievements has been exceptional and long. And because I know we're all eager to speak with him, I'm going to turn over in just a moment. His papers have been not only published in some of the leading journals in economics, but also across a wide range of disciplines, areas, and sub-areas, let's say, in political economy, economic literature, tax and public finance, and American Economic Review. He received his bachelor degrees from University of Wisconsin, and then both his master's and PhD in economics from Washington University in St. Louis. And if you don't know him from any of those many achievements and positions, you may recognize his voice from Kai Risdale's show, where he appears quite frequently on Marketplace on NPR. He's appeared there a number of times, as well as across media and in a variety of public venues. Gary Hoover, welcome to Tulane. Welcome to this series, and thank you for kicking off the series. Let me just say before I turn it over to you that for those of you who are listening who are interested in joining the workshop tomorrow, especially again, PhD students, junior faculty here at Tulane, that is something that you need to register for, and it's open to Tulane communities, and you do so by emailing Joe Mistro here in the Tulane Dean's office. You can get his email off our website. And you can also take a look at our website to see some of the speakers and topics and disciplines we'll be looking at later on in the semester, including sociology, communication studies, and anthropology with some exceptional leaders in the field. Hoove, once again, welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you to make some remarks, and then we'll be moving over to Q&A a little bit later on, which again, for those of you who've joined since my introductory remarks, put in your questions in the Q&A chat box. I'll see them. I'll be moderating after Dr. Hoover's remarks. So take it away. Thank you.
All right, so thank you everybody for allowing me to talk. Look, what I'm going to do is probably going to be a little bit different than what you would have expected. I'm going to talk a little bit about the problem in the economics profession. But the problem in the economics profession is the problem in a lot of professions in academia. And then what I want to do is talking a little bit about the problem. I want to talk a lot about solutions. I want to talk a lot about the avenues and the things that we are trying to do to address these things. The reason that I think that this will be helpful is not only will it show you some of the things that economics is doing, but these are the same things that other professions can take up on their own to help in their fields. So with that, let me just share one simple graph. All right, so now I'm sharing this graph. This comes from a report created by the American Economics Association Committee on the Status of Minority Groups. I'm the co-chair of that committee with Ibanya Washington of Yale University. Now, I've been the co-chair of that committee for about a decade now. So here is the problem. If you look at this table 1 here, let's look at degrees conferred, specifically right here. If we look at Black African Americans, you'll see that at the BA level, about 5.16% of degrees were conferred on Black African Americans, right? If we look at all minorities, will see about 17%. But as we move up the ranks, we see that the degree conferment is dropping. When you get to the MA level, it's dropped a little bit. By the time you get to the PhD level, it's dropped by nearly half. And the numbers were never really that great if you looked at Black African Americans. We went from the BA level from 5.16% down to the PhD level at 2.8%. One of the common refrains we hear is, well, maybe because economics is so mathematically intense that these folks don't have the skill sets or the requisite skill sets to accomplish that. Well, that's nonsense. Number one, let's look at table number 2 real quickly. And here are degrees conferred in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics disciplines. And if we look once again, what we find is that the STEM disciplines are doing better than economics. So what that tells me is, let's look at the PhD level real quick here. And what you'll see is, let's be clear, 2.8% to Black African American PhDs in economics. However, 4.19% PhDs conferred to Black African American in the STEM disciplines. That means that those people with the skill sets, if that's what the problem is, to accomplish a PhD, are choosing to take their skills somewhere else. That's the problem faced by economics. Something is wrong with the economics profession when people are choosing to go to pure math more so than they would choose to go to economics. That's something wrong with the discipline itself. So it's not a matter, let me reiterate that, it's not a matter of the skill sets. It is something about the discipline that is causing these talented people to move on. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go on and share my screen and take you to this page. And that's what I'm going to do. I am just going to spend the rest of the time going over ideas and resources available in the economics profession, but also ideas that might be helpful for other disciplines. As I told you at the onset, I am the co-chair of the Committee on the Status of Minority Groups in the economics profession. We use the shortened name of SIMGEP for short, the SIMGEP. So let me just start taking you through things that we're going to do to try and help to increase those numbers. Remember, 2.8 for African Americans, Blacks, and the numbers for Hispanics and Native peoples were even lower. So one of the things we do is the SIMGEP runs a minority job market candidate list. One of the most common things we hear is, well, our university, our business, our government agency would hire minorities, but we don't know where they are. We never see any. Nonsense. Here, every year, we're going to put up a list of people and their fields so that people know that they can come here and look and see, here is a list of minorities who have self-identified themselves as such, who are letting you know that they are employable. They're looking for jobs in the profession. So for those who are serious about these efforts, here's a resource. And I would encourage those in the economics profession to take advantage of this. And for those who are in other fields, if you don't already have one, to start one of these ideas. Great resource. So let me take you here. I'm going to take you to another page. And the SIMGAP, the Committee on the Status of Minority Groups, runs 3 main programs. Here's the first one I want to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about the Summer Training Program. This is a program that is 2 months long, run during the summer at a host university. The host university now hosting the program is the economics department at Howard University. Please feel free to go to this website and look all of this stuff up also, if I didn't mention that before. Here's what we do. Lots of times, our minority undergraduates think about a PhD in economics or advanced training in economics, but they don't really know what it is, right? They don't really know what the rigors are for graduate school. They don't know much about the profession at all. So what we're going to do to try and help that pipeline to get that number up is we're going to run a summer training program at a host university to where students can get that training and that exposure to the profession, not just in an academic sense, but also for those of us who go on to work at government agencies, those of us who end up working in the private sector, to allow them to see what it is that we do, right? Too often, our undergraduates think all you professors do is teach, right? Well, no, there's a lot more to it, but you can't expect them to be aware of those things if they haven't been exposed. And so, one of the things that we want to do with the SIMGAP is expose students. Hopefully, that one makes sense. Now, that's been going on for a while. In fact, this summer training program produced me. In 1992, I went through this summer program, and for good or for bad, now you have another African American PhD economist specifically because of this summer training program. So the results speak for itself. It's worth it. Another program we have here is called the mentoring program. For all of you economists out there or economists want to be, you want to think about this one. Here's what we're doing in this program. We're taking graduate students in economics and we're pairing them up with mentors. Might be someone who is an underrepresented minority, might not be. In fact, as you saw from the numbers, it can't just be underrepresented minority faculty or professionals because we don't have enough. So here's an opportunity for someone who has already achieved a degree to mentor someone who is working towards a degree. Quite helpful because your dissertation advisor might be someone who is quite versed in the field and in the techniques and in the theories of whatever it is that the person is working on, but not necessarily in navigating some of the roadblocks that a underrepresented minority might encounter. That's why these mentoring programs are so helpful. So what I'm going to encourage you to do, if you are in the economics profession, is become a mentor. And if you're a graduate student, to sign up to be a mentee. Now, I know I'm going fast and there's lots of details here, but you can look all of this stuff up yourself and come back to it. This helps, this works. So please think about this for your discipline if you don't already have it. But if you do already, if you are in economics, then sign up to be a mentor. We're willing to accept anybody, not just underrepresented minorities. Finally, we run a summer fellows program. Pretty simple. It's sort of like a internship program for PhD economists. So Along the side here, you will see the government agencies and the non-government agencies. This list is a little bit out of date. There are other agencies who participate in this. And you can spend a summer working at one of these agencies. And hopefully, after spending a summer working at one of these agencies and being mentored, um, that will expose you to the type of work being done by these folks, by these participating groups. And that's another way of increasing the diversity of our profession by having programs like this. So as you noticed, we had one for undergraduates, we had one for, beginning graduate students, and this one for late arriving graduate students. But that's not going to be all that we have. I'm going to have to come out of sharing for a minute to um, change the screen back. Sorry about that, folks. Let me go back to this page. So another thing that we're going to have, let me go to this page, and hopefully you're seeing this, something called DITE, or in other words, the Diversity Initiative for Tenure in Economics. This is not run by the SIMGAP, by the way. This is being run out of Duke University. Um, this is an interesting program that works really well. This is basically a mentoring program for junior faculty members, right? So you're a brand new, freshly minted PhD. You're at some type of academic institution, and you don't know what it takes to get tenure at your institution, or maybe you do know, but you need some help along the way. That's what this one does, where this DITE, or this diversity initiative, is an excellent example of that final mile. I actually was a mentor in this program to a young man who was fresh in the profession. And guess what? Even to this day, we're still colleagues, and we are actually co-authors together in that we write papers together. So just another idea of what profession can do if you take the initiative to do so. Um, all you have to do is get some senior members to mentor junior members, to let them know about some of the hurdles that could potentially impact them along the way. Great idea, and I would encourage all of you to think about that. Let me go back to the main page here. Sorry about that. I don't know why this won't go down. Let me do this. Okay. All right. Another interesting thing that you'll see is this thing right here, this featured profile. What we have, and this is a pretty neat innovation that we have, is that we have a series of profiles on underrepresented minority economists. So one of the things that students wonder is, how does someone get from where I am to where they are now? What was their story? How did they navigate themselves to where they are now? And you can come to this page and take a look. What I do in some of my classes, or what I used to do in some of my classes, was I would have students actually write a small report on some of these people. Because one of the things that our underrepresented minority students aren't used to seeing is, given that those numbers are so low, they're not used to seeing anyone who looks like them. As such, since they don't see anyone who looks like them, they don't see a place for themselves in this business. Not true at all. So if you take a look at some of the profiles we have, here is Derek Hamilton, um, well-known economist, right? I think I can look at Randall Key. He runs the Native American Studies program at UCLA. I think he's still at UCLA. And so one of the things you would want to do is be able to profile some people in your profession who are doing the types of things that are of interest to our younger colleagues. And that's why this is important. Let me go back and show you something else because there's some more things I want to show you. Another thing that I want to show you is right here. Last summer, as you know, we had racial tensions going on in the United States. And the American Economics Association was taken to task over their paltry efforts. And so there were 5 new initiatives that the American Economics Association took up. One of them, as you can see here, is an award for outstanding achievement in diversity and inclusion. That one went to the University of Missouri. Now, it didn't have to necessarily go to a university. It could have been a government organization. But here's what we know in economics. What we do know in economics is that incentives matter. And so what we want to do is put in place incentives to try and achieve the outcomes that we're looking for, right? So nothing tells a junior faculty member or a department chair that, hey, you know what, diversity matters more than saying, I shall not fund you if you don't take on clear and proactive steps to make your faculty and make your student body and to make yourselves more diverse. A second program that we just started, these are all just started this summer, is the departmental seed grants for innovation in diversity and inclusion. So sometimes an organization wants to get on board and they want to become more diverse and inclusive. They've got an idea, but they need a little help to get over that initial hurdle. And so the American Economics Association now has a small seed grant opportunity, which is really helping. The 2020 recipients were Georgia State and SMU. Not bad at all. The third thing that we're doing is the Andrew Bremer Undergraduate Essay Prize. And this one went to Aladdin right here. Pretty simple award here. Undergraduates need to write an essay on the status of African Americans in the US economy, and then it's going to be judged. Really good way to get undergraduates interested in economics and thinking about the status of minority groups in economics. And get this, Andrew Bremer, right, as many of you may know, is the first African American put on the Federal Reserve Board, right? So in the 1960s, Andrew Bremer was nominated to the Federal Reserve Board. Really interesting that it was named after him because a private donor donated the funds to fund this essay prize. Simply amazing. And it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. It's exposing undergraduates to this area and making this area more appealing. That's all we want to do. We want to make this area more appealing. The fourth new initiative is the undergraduate travel grant. So if you're at a smaller university or an underfunded university, want to go to the meetings, want to go to our main conference, which is the AEA main conference. but the funding isn't there from the university, no problem. They can apply for travel grants to make it to the meetings. Other disciplines, you ought to take advantage of this. It's so low in cost for your discipline, but so very high on return and investment that this works and it should be taken advantage of. Finally, as lots of folks know, it's not always what you know, it's who you know. And so, what we've done with the small group breakfast is we've taken a select group of junior underrepresented minorities and set them up to have a breakfast with um, a very prominent economist. Last year, the economist was Jim Perturbo, who runs the NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research. Um, and he was able to make connections with these folks, which are going to help them down the road. These are the types of things that make a difference because always remember in the back of your mind that 2.8%. There's no way that the US population can be, 13 percentage African American, right? And an even higher percentage of minority, and yet have those paltry numbers in this discipline. There's something wrong with this discipline, and we have to do something to address it. So that's what these efforts are about. Let me, and I know I'm going fast, but I would encourage you all to make your way to the American Economics Association and then on to our webpage, because that's what all of this is for, to get you folks to see what can be done. And we can sit around and we can bemoan the problem all day, or we can roll up our sleeves and start trying to think of things to do to make it better. Here, I'm going to take you to off this page again. I'm going to take you to a different page. We set this up a couple of years ago. It's called the Diversifying Economic Seminars speaker list. So many of our underrepresented minorities don't get invited to give seminars at University X or at Institution Y. And once again, the common refrain is, well, the reason that we haven't invited any minorities or any people from a diverse background is we don't know any. We don't know where to find any. Nonsense. Look, you can come here and look through the database, which has, I think at present, it has about 600 self-identified people on it. You're looking for an underrepresented minority, right? Someone has identified themselves as such. You're looking for a woman economist, someone has identified themselves as such. You're looking for somebody from the LGBTQ community, someone has identified themselves as such. And then to take it one step further, they're going to tell you the fields that they work in, right? So this person says that he or she works in health, education, and welfare, and has a link to their website that you can see whether or not they fit with what it is that you're trying to have a seminar about. I've seen this list used for way more than just inviting people. Actually, quite often nowadays, members of the press are going to this website and they're looking to expand the list of people who they contact about issues relating to the economy, right? Issues relating to this or that. And so members of the press are using this. You can use this too. Also, I've encouraged my senior colleagues to use this when they're thinking about grant writing, right? When was the last time you were writing a grant and you thought about adding an underrepresented minority to the grant list, right? And you said, well, I want someone who works in the area I work in. Here's an absolutely excellent opportunity to find someone who does exactly that. So let me just keep moving on here because there's just so much that I could talk to you about. We also run a wiki, right? So you teach. What you're teaching is staid, tried, not very innovative, and off-putting to minorities, right? But you don't want to be necessarily. Then come to the wiki and learn about anti-racism in the classroom, right? So how to teach, look right here, practices for instructors, how to teach anti-racist courses, right? How to diversify your speakers, how to actively recruit students who are maybe underprepared, unsure, unaware, right? Um, just a ton of really useful techniques, really useful. You're saying to yourself, I'm someone who's been in this profession for a long time. I am uncomfortable. I don't know what to do. I'm afraid of misspeaking. I'm afraid of speaking at all, right? And you need tools. No problem. You want to do this and you need tools? Well, come to our wiki and here will be the tools necessary for you to be more inclusive for our profession, to do our profession justice. I only want to show you one more thing. Let me take you back here. Sorry about that. Let me see if I can get back to the main page. Sorry about this, folks. Um, so I just really want to show you resources, 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 so that the next time before you get ready to say, I don't know, right? I don't know how to do this as it relates to being more diverse and inclusive. Come and look at the resources. That's what these resources are here for, right? If you don't know, then educate yourself. The way that you do that is by taking advantage of the resources available. I've got a ton of them here. I can't even go through all of the other tabs that I have down here. But I did want to show you that we do have a listserv. If you were to click here on the listserv, you can sign up to receive email blasts from us about the goings on, minorities goings on in the profession. If your profession, I don't know how many people listening are non-minority, but if your profession doesn't have one, this is an excellent resource for you. Finally, this will be the final thing and then I will shut up. Last summer, my co-chair, Ibanya Washington, myself, and Amanda Bear wrote this paper, How You Can Work to Increase the Presence and Improve the Experience of Black, Latinx, and Native American People in the Economics Profession. Here's what we did, which is different from what you've seen before. Most times when you see a survey of how minorities feel about their profession, it's normally those people who are in the profession. Well, here's what we did in this paper, and I encourage you to read it. We went and found people who left the profession. And then we surveyed them and we asked them, what was it about economics that was so off putting that it caused you to leave, right? To take the drastic measure of saying, this profession will not work for me in its current state. So take a look at this. And, we're obviously talking to people who stayed in the profession, but we're contrasting that with those who didn't. And the number one thing that they said, right? What they said was that this profession, it wasn't about the math skills at all, right? It was about the environment. It was about the climate of not feeling welcomed and invited. So the first thing you need to do is inform yourself. Inform yourself about the practices that you've had and how you conducted yourself, because that's what people said that they were off put by. And there are other steps, but I've gone on too long. I said I was going to be at 30 minutes. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop and I'm going to turn it back over to Dean Edwards. And I know that this wasn't a talk in the traditional sense, but I hope that you walked away with a bunch of information that you can use in economics profession and without.
Hove, great. Thank you so much. And that's a great way to launch the conversation tonight, and so much wonderful resources. We're getting a flood of questions. We've had more than 120 people signed in listening to this, and I know that they're coming from a range of places and disciplines. And so it's really wonderfully useful, I think, for the economists to have these resources. We've got one question that's asked if we could post some of the websites that you've referenced, particularly that wiki page that you've sent.
You can get to all of it. All of that goes, just go type in American Economics Association. Once you get to our committee page, everything I just showed you is just a link away. Everything that you're looking for is right there on the AEA website. So, and
Great.
if Joe could find that, he might even be able to put that up in the chat. Just go to the American Economic Association, type that in, find the Committee on the Status and Minority Groups, and you're there. Everything I just clicked on came from one page.
That's great. All right, let's go back a little bit, and as we start to work through some of the questions, and I wanted to, if you don't mind, bring in another aspect of anti-racism or racism in economics profession, and you talked very specifically about the sort of pipeline questions, and we're getting questions in the chat about that. Let's talk about, and you can tell me if you disagree with, in a sense, the premise of the series that I started with by talking about the discipline itself, or some of the so-called rules of economics. Can you talk a little bit about, in other words, so one of the goals you need to do is get students, African-American students, underrepresented minorities into the majors, into the MAs and PhD programs, as you've shown, and the statistics are quite powerful there. But can we talk a little bit too about what happens when you get into an economics kind of classroom, like how, and I've heard you speak about this, how economics is taught. What, is there a problem with the way Econ 101, not at Tulane, but just in general, is structured itself?
Right. Well, quite simply put, economics believes in the premise of the rational man, right? Not even the rational human, the rational man. And people of color, minorities, come with these questions around racism, around discrimination. And economics would teach you that racism cannot exist. No person would engage in racism because it would be against their own self-interest. It would be against their own pocketbooks to engage in any discriminatory activity. So therefore, that's not anything that should be studied. Well, of course, that's utter nonsense, right? We know that racism is real, racism exists. And so, what is the talented minority student going to do? If economics is saying what you're seeing isn't real, they're going to go to another discipline where they're saying, "Yo, no, we see what you're saying, and we encourage you to investigate that further." So, if a minority student in their very first class is told that people are rational and people won't engage in irrational behavior because racism and discrimination is irrational, then that tells that person from day one it is time to go find another field.
And do you see that, I mean, just looking at the way the textbooks, or the ways that, when people go in to teach a class, are there even textbooks that you kind of push people to, or the very material itself?
It's exactly that, right? So if we're going to start out with this premise, right? So for instance, one of the things that'll come up is we'll say, well, labor market's clear, right? And where you think you're finding discrimination in the labor market is actually something based on time in the job or skill sets. It's not really discriminatory. However, some of my colleagues have done work that shows that it starts even before the job begins, so that black sounding names those resumes get tossed in the trash.
Mhm.
So if that happens, right, and we know that that's real, then the whole premise that all things being held equal, which is something we say often in economics, has been destroyed because things weren't equal from the start. So there's room to study, and students see that. They want to investigate that. They're being told by their colleagues, well, by the faculty, go find something else to study. You know what the students do? They go find something else to study.
Um, let's talk a little bit more then about, well, I mean, maybe one of the questions, and you're so eloquent about moving between mentoring and kind of, some of the specific things we need to do and actually drawing our attention to these websites and where to find people to hire and so on. And then the kind of theories of the discipline, as you were saying there. Does that lead to, not to jump ahead, but for scholars to do different kind of writing and creating more and different kinds of resources for the broader teaching of economics? I mean, in other words, do we need people to think about writing new textbooks as well and kind of, taking apart some of those premises?
Well, exactly. So I was approached by a textbook company not too long ago because they saw the profile. And I said, one of the things you should do is why don't you start putting these types of profiles into your textbook, letting people know that this exists in the teaching. But in the discipline itself, we've had some areas that minorities wanted to investigate, where they were told by their PhD advisors, they were told by the gatekeepers in the discipline that those are not worthy avenues of investigation. So if the gatekeepers of the discipline are saying that those are unworthy avenues of investigation, then quite obviously it makes sense for people to move on to other areas and other disciplines.
Mhm.
Um, that's our problem. Our problem is the people who are doing the research are the ones who end up writing the textbooks.
Right.
If they're not doing the research around these pertinent questions, then the textbooks are going to be reflective of that. And that is where we end up with the problem.
Right. Great. I've got a couple of questions that come in that kind of bounce off this. First, one is from Doug Harris, is the chair of our economics department, who wants me to start by saying how thrilled he is to have you in the economics department as part of your appointment, and that the work that you're doing is just so important. His question here is, what are some of the less obvious ways, and I think in some ways you just anticipated the question here, but what are some of the less obvious ways in which the lack of diversity in economics influences the nature of research that's being conducted in the profession, including the very topics we study and the ways we approach them?
Well, quite simply put, we're not fully examining areas of interest because, for instance, we've got an area in economics known as environmental economics, right? And so, with global warming happening, right, lots of people are more interested in environmental economics than ever before. But what seems to get missed is the racial implications of environmental economics. I'm just picking on that, but I could pick on any health economics, right? And what we need to do is have a diversity of eyes looking at these topics to then be able to more fully flesh out the implications. My work up until this point has always been around, you tell me a policy, I want to look and see how the cost or benefits are distributed up and down the income distribution. But sometimes I want to look how the costs and benefits are distributed up and down the racial distribution, right? We need people to be open to asking those questions. Here's the problem for our colleagues. since our colleagues haven't thought about it, it's hard for them to then say that they want to direct a student who wants to do it. Because most of us want to stay in our small little narrow lanes. And if a student comes from a perspective that hasn't been explored before, they're like, oh, I've never thought about it that way. You need to go find someone else. No, they need to stay with you and you need to educate yourself to help. That's why I provided all of these resources on that website,
Right.
that you can educate yourself, but then help those students.
It's great. Um, as the questions coming in, Hoover, I know we're starting to get some definition of our audience, and we know we have both colleagues of yours in economics, faculty, and other departments and programs, students, and an alum, and now also a high school student. I'm going to ask the high school students question in a second, which is
Sure.
just great. But one of the places, just to stay on the strand of thought and that we are following, also I had it as my next question for you, and one of our colleagues, Patrick Button in the economics department, has also asked a version of this. Could you tell people a little bit about William Spriggs, was a professor of economics at Howard and at Howard University and the chief economist of AFL-CIO, who wrote an open letter, I guess it was last year, which was called "Is Now a Teachable Moment for Economics?" And just kind of share that a little bit with folks, what's going on in that.
Look, basically, without going into the weeds of it, and that's the problem with this when you start talking to economists, they always want to go into the weeds, is can everything be explained away by statistical discrimination? The thing I was just talking about before, where we just say, with all things being equal, there really isn't much difference between these folks once you account for this, this, and this. That's not true. That's the bottom line. The bottom line is what we don't do is look at this topic. For instance, look at, the topic of health outcomes. And then we say, well, we better put in a racial control variable somewhere on the back of it. What we better do is wonder how that racial control is influencing these results and not something we do at the back end of it. That's the long and the short of it.
Yeah. All right. Now I promised I was going to ask the high school students question, and it really does segue in a well. The high school student says, after identifying themselves as a high school student, I think there are a lot of misunderstandings about the field of economics and how it can be used. I was wondering how we could encourage minority high school students to get interested in economics in the hope of increasing the number of minority economists.
Well, excellent question. One of the things you should look at is there's a website for the Council of Economic Education, right? The CEE. Great resource for, that's all the council is about, is the Council of Economic Education is strictly about K through 12 introductions to economics, right? When I give talks to high school students, and I do, one of the things I do is I do an experiment with them where I segregate the group, and then on purpose, when I separate the groups, I put one at a disadvantage, right? On purpose. And then we're able to talk about, well, because some would argue, well, look, you started out at a disadvantage, but all you got to do is, put your head down and you'll overcome these disadvantages, and they're not really that real. But it's a great talking point. So for the student, what I found is instead of reading hardcore, papers with tons of mathematics and statistics, look at some of those teaching tools. Excellent resources for the high school student. Also, I don't know if that student knows it, but there's also something called the Economics Olympiad, run every year, where 2 representatives of every state are sent to the Boston Federal Reserve Bank to participate in a 100-student Olympiad. Go win it for the state of Louisiana.
Excellent. I was thinking about that. We don't have any grade school children watching, but there's my 9-year-old daughter gave me as a Christmas gift a game I hadn't seen, Ms. Monopoly. Maybe you've heard about that. And it was basically, we love to play Monopoly at my house, and she loves to play it a lot. But this game, if you were a girl or a woman playing the game, when you passed go, you got twice as much money. It was kind of reversing. I was thinking about that when you said it. It was kind of teaching to a young kid a principle or in the reverse of discrimination or anti-discrimination there too. Sorry for that little thing. I'm waiting for my grade school child to ask a question. Let's talking again on this pipeline here. I'm getting questions from multiple different sources. We're talking a lot of initiatives. This actually comes from Jim Alm, our professor emeritus of economics and former chair of the department. And he says here that who've talked about initiative at the professions level, what do you think Tulane or an individual university for folks who are watching can do?
Here's what I think. Here's the main problem with the economics profession. I said this before, but let me say this more clearly now. The problem with the economics profession is a failure to use economics, right? And what we know is incentives matter. If I tell a department or if I tell an individual, your pay, your promotion, your resources are tied to how well you engage in trying to think about ways to diversify. If I tell you that, that will be the motivation for you to then start thinking about doing it. That's what we know economics is. What's amazing to me is that when it comes to things like research productivity, we've got manuals, thick manuals that say, here's what you have to do to be promoted. If you talk about teaching quality, we go so far as at the end of every semester to get teaching evaluations from students to make sure we can judge how well you taught. We say we want diversity, but where are the metrics? Do we have diversity evaluations at the end of every semester? No. We don't do the same things we do for every other thing we say is important. Let us use economics, us economists.
No, that's it's a great point, and not only as a mechanism, and we are thinking, and many of us recognize the inherent biases of teaching evaluations. Believe it or not, we're working on how do you address those, and changing them is one way. Staying on back to my meta moment for a second, something you just said really provokes this question, which is that when we step back to the disciplines, and I'm still really interested in probing this idea. There are both, it seems to me, forms of data or forms of measurement or ways of measuring or kind of bringing together information or proof, let's say, if I think across multiple disciplines for the arguments one wants to make. And it all seems to me that there are ways of thinking within disciplines that are structured in a way by the disciplines that we push back at, that approach problems differently, right? I've been really personally fascinated lately by behavioral economics and reading a lot more and more in it. And of course, itself a collision, let's say, of psychology and economics. So, back to the question of teaching and teaching evaluation, that point you're making there about how economics and anti-racist economics thinks about teaching in general. Would you say that that's kind of framed by disciplinary ways of thinking, now pushing it back at themselves?
Right. Well, one thing we haven't been good at, and this is probably true of lots of professions, but I just know economics the best because this is what I've been doing for 25 years, is that if something worked last semester, then that's exactly what I plan to do again this semester.
Mhm.
The idea of inertia to make any real changes is really hard for this discipline, and I'm probably sure that's what's going on. That's why we need the diversity. We need the diversity because the new entrants will have new ideas and new approaches. That's how you bring about innovation.
So here we are, okay, in this series that you're speaking in. The last time we did this, we're not only on campus, we're in this beautiful room. I can't wait to show you when you're moved here to New Orleans. It looks out over the city, looks out over our campus. And we've done so many events in that format that anyone who's been on universities is kind of familiar with them one way or another. the last 10 months, we've learned how to have events on Zoom. We've learned how to teach on Zoom. Our faculty and students have learned how to do this. How does that, it's thinking back, thinking forward to a post-pandemic situation, in the classroom. We've also, as you addressed, and a part of a crucial part of what's happened over the last 10 months are the protests in the wake of the Floyd killing, the murder, for racial justice, which of course many people have been involved in for a very long time, but made this a much more mainstream kind of conversation, let's say. And so one of the things that comes out of that is we don't want to get back to normal, language that we're talking about with COVID, like when can we get back to normal, get to a post-pandemic situation. Thinking now about anti-racism in the classroom and teaching, what can we do differently as we're starting to think about that along the lines that you're talking about? Can we take advantage of, or do you see any, I don't want to say silver linings, but lessons that we can extract from these sorts of the format that we've all been plunged into and developing over the last few months?
The conversations matter, right? No matter how small, here's the point. No matter how small and insignificant they might seem, all of these conversations matter. This meeting we're having now matters because it's sparking ideas. And so what we want to do is keep the momentum going.
Mm-hmm.
Keep the momentum going. Don't stop it. And I love the idea that this is not a one-off, but my talk is a part of a series.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we have to do. Keep the momentum going and intersperse ideas. So ideas that I brought up tonight, which is probably more formulaic than other speakers are going to do, can then be incorporated with other speakers.
Well, by the moment, that's as if this were an NPR episode, which gives us a chance to take a little break and say that if you look in the chat, we've got a link to upcoming speakers in the Anti-Racism and the Disciplines series. And we're going to keep talking to Gary Hoover for a bit longer, but let me just plug that on March 2nd, our next event, Mary Patillo, the Howard Washington Professor of Sociology and Chair of the Department of African American Studies at Northwestern University, will be speaking on anti-racism in sociology. Then on March 30th, at the end of March, Lee Baker, who's Professor of Cultural Anthropology, Sociology, and African American Studies at Duke University, will be speaking about anti-racism and anthropology. And then later in the spring, in April, we haven't got the exact date yet, but Sarah Jackson, who's Presidential Associate Professor and Co-Director of Media Inequality and Change Center at University of Pennsylvania, will be speaking on anti-racism and communication studies. We're looking for events in the fall. We've already been kind of slotting in some speakers in the humanities. And in fact, I think the series has already got somebody lined up for spring 2022. And I'm hoping, Hoof, that we'll actually perhaps bring together in the end, since we'll eventually be moving these back to in-person events, some kind of symposium where we do sort of multidisciplinary conversation to bring folks back. So thanks for referencing the series. You can see the link on the website that's in the chat. Let me go back to some of the questions. I think you can see them too. I'll give you a chance to see they're piling up here. Yeah, you want to go ahead?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Pick one more and or one or two more, and then we'll. I know people are zoomed out at the end of the day, so I want to get offline and save them.
Well, let's go back. I mean, I was thinking, and actually, when I went to college, I had declared on my application that I was thinking about becoming an economics major, actually, and went in and took an economics class. I have to say, I didn't particularly love it, and I took micro, and then I said, you know what, I thought I was going to be an economics major. Let me take another economics class, and so I took another one, macroeconomics, and somehow I wasn't gelling with the discipline. It wasn't telling a story that captivated me about how to think in economic terms. And I don't know if that's because of inherent racism of the field or the way it was taught, but I've heard it said about our economics department that it developed a way of bringing students into a discipline and a way of thinking in disciplinary terms. And I think in some ways, a lot of what you're talking about is how to do so in yet a better way. So we get a number of questions here about, as we've been probing, bringing, students in to the pipeline. We have actually one of our alumni who is a Joe Shorter from Atlanta, whom I've met in Atlanta, who actually asked a question about the pipeline, and says here, assuming one doesn't earn a PhD without a master's and earn a master's without a bachelor's, how do we actually recruit or African American undergraduate economics students? He said, he tells his own story that he was a math major, and maybe he would have considered economics if he'd been recruited into the field. Do you think there's a place for recruiting minority students into the discipline itself, and how would you encourage people in the position to do so?
Right, exactly. I think that's the problem. Most people, what we need to do is just have a more general introduction of what economics is. And the way we do that is by posing questions. So in my case, I was worried about labor outcomes. I wondered why it was that some people worked harder than others. And then, if it was always the case that hard work made you more successful, then there was something wrong. That's an interesting question that crosses many disciplines. And so, what you want to be able to do is not spend the student's one chance in economics spending the whole time talking about widgets. If I see one more professor talk about widgets and whether or not, firm A is selling widgets to consumer B, that's why people aren't interested. I got a PhD in economics and I'm not interested in widgets. Don't ever say widgets again if you want to attract people. Don't ever say it.
Look, we have a local journalist, business journalist, who asked a question here, and so we're going to give something to her. Her question is: could you comment, Hoove, on how increasing the diversity of economic research and teaching might affect the U.S. economy itself and the diversity of economic opportunity overall?
Quite easily put. We are a country of 350 million people. We've got 13% of the people not fully engaged in the economy. No wonder we're not fully having the economic engine running at full capacity. You can't expect to have 13% of your potential labor force sitting it out, but yet to see the engine working at full steam. That's the advantage of incorporating a more diverse pool of people and finding ways to incorporate them into the labor force. Because here's what we teach in economics in that 101 class, that fully engaged employees become fully engaged consumers. That's how the circular flow goes. You want more product sold, get more people working and they'll buy more stuff. You want to sell more stuff, get more people working. Don't have 13% of your workforce sitting it out. Engage that labor force.
Great. All right, let me ask one last question, although they keep coming in, Hoove. So I'm got a lot of appreciation for your remarks here and what you're bringing to Tulane in this series, coming in from folks. Our colleague Annalise Singh, the Chief Diversity Officer, who's joined Tulane not too many months before you, welcomes you to Tulane and says how glad she's here and thanks you for highlighting these resources. She asks, are there other things you'd like to see economics faculty do in the classroom every day to address issues of race and racism?
Yeah. So one of the things we could do is inform ourselves to the unique experiences that people are coming to, and this is more broadly than just underrepresented minorities, right? Expose ourselves to the experiences that people are bringing in. For instance, one of the things that we learned through some other research that I've done is lots of times your underrepresented minorities are first generation college students. And in general, whether you're an underrepresented minority or not, a first generation college student is less likely to know some of the pretty standard things about college life, such as
Yeah.
one of the things we found is office hours. Um, First generation students in particular seem to not understand that office hours are open and should be used liberally. So those are the types of simple things we can do, is to educate the students every day, point out to students. I think the question was, what can we do every day?
Yep.
Point out to students every day that if you don't wait until you're struggling to come talk to me. And even if you are struggling, come to me. That's what I'm here for. That's why Tulane pays its faculty so fabulously well. They want you to come.
Mhm. No, that's tremendously important. And I think uh, the ways in which, as a teaching practice, demystifying university life, as you say, there's so much that the ways, the structures, the architecture, the systems, the departments, I mean, of university, they're so confusing and complex, and demystifying and making welcome these places is so important for the work that we do here, especially for first generation students. And frankly, I mean, look at the imposing, beautiful but imposing architecture of most campuses. Is something that needs to be demystified. I really love that advice here. Hoove, this I'm wary with all these questions here, that to leave any of them on the table, but there's dozens, and we still hold the attention of quite a lot of folks here. We still have a lot of people joining us here, which shows the energy and interest here in the topic. And I just want to thank you for starting us off on the series. You're right, Zoom temporality is a little bit different, so we shouldn't let this drag on too long. I wish this were followed by the kind of reception where people could mingle and ask questions more casually, but that will have to wait for when we start getting back to doing things in person again. Hoove, I can't wait to welcome you in person to Tulane and to New Orleans, but just a tremendous excitement that I share with so many people on this chat of getting to work together, to work with you in my role as a colleague and as a partner in making a real difference. And I think you're giving us a lot of tools and also reasons for optimism that we can do better in the academy and in the profession. So just want to thank you so much for leading us off with such a great conversation.
And finally, let me say that when I finally do get to campus, I'll be in Tilton Hall.
Tilton Hall.
Feel free to, let's continue this conversation in any way that any of you folks want to. For those of you who are in the New Orleans area, I shall be available to talk.
Great. And we will be, another benefit of these, we'll be putting these conversations on our website that goes with the series. And again, it's in the chat there along with a couple other links. Thanks again, Hoove. And I hope those in the audience, let me just plug one last event that's actually not in the series. Our next sort of school-wide organized event is actually something we're also really proud of, which is a new lectureship as part of President Fitz's Tulane Trailblazers that started last year, that recognizes the achievements of our underrepresented minority alumni in a variety of ways. And the School of Liberal Arts hosts one such Tulane Trailblazer. We put together the Bobby Ann Lectureship in Media and Social Change last year. We'll be having our second event. It's an annual lecture named after Bobby Ann, who was a graduate of Tulane School of Liberal Arts Communication Studies Department, and also founder of the Asian American Students Association here, which still exists. And he met with them when he came to campus last year. On February 18th, Cecilia Aldarondo, oh, there you go. There you go. He's screen sharing. It's wonderful. There, I don't have to hold it up. Who's a documentary director and producer from Puerto Rican diaspora, will be speaking in the Bobby Ann Lectureship in Media and Social Change, which really focuses on media makers who are doing work through their own practice to engage in questions of social change. And it should be a wonderful thing. We've also purchased the rights to stream her films, which you can now see. We'll be putting links to that through our through the library as part of preparing for her visit. And that, of course, will be on February 18th, 6 p.m. on Zoom. I hope you'll be seeing it, following our social media on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter for the school. Hoove, Dr. Hoover, thank you again, and thanks all of us. Thanks to my assistant, Joe Mistro, for organizing this webinar and doing all of the work that prepared for it, and to the whole team in the School of Liberal Arts for their work in preparing this series. Thanks, Hoove. See you soon. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Stay safe, everybody.